Hey everybody, it's Tracy again, and continuing on with the prepaid debit card is the concept of BINs, bank identification numbers. And the primary means with which you go about being able to issue your own card is to obtain a BIN, right? And to obtain your own unique BIN, that involves a fairly complex, somewhat expensive, but long 9 months process of going to card issuer, Visa, MasterCard, American Express. And the first 6 digits of your debit card is your BIN, right, of the financial institution. You have that route. And to go the sort of organic route always requires some kind of licensing, right? You could even be a money transmitter in a foreign context, like an EMI or something like that. And that would allow you to get a BIN. You can't just be a non-regulated entity and get a BIN. The alternative to that somewhat long process is BIN sponsorship. And that is where you effectively lease a BIN from a bank or other non-bank financial institution, right? And the process is much shorter, far less expensive, mostly due diligence. And from a legal perspective, really your only obligation, right, is to be some kind of money service business in the United States. It'll vary when you look in like the EU and UK, where it may require licensing, but in the United States, even if you're like a money transmitter in one state, right, which many of like your prepaid debit card issuers are, that's typically sufficient, right? And it varies based on the non-bank financial institution that you're typically getting these from, right, to get BIN sponsorship. And, you know, the only trick with BIN sponsorship versus just getting your own dedicated BIN is that now you have an intermediary, right? You know, you have interchange, everything, but now you're like paying fees to, right? So if you're running a prepaid debit card program and you're working on a BIN sponsorship model, you in turn have to charge higher fees to your customers for you to make a profit, right? Because there's, again, this intermediary and the sponsor. And so it's not for everybody in the sense, right? But typically prepaid programs have very high fees, whereas debit card programs don't, because there's so much competition, right? And prepaid debit cards tend to be catered to mostly unbanked individuals who fairly or unfairly will accept and or like pay the higher fees, right? Because they don't really have an alternative. So it's something to consider, right? Like in my experience in recent years, prepaid debit, right? Or I'm sorry, just debit on a BIN sponsorship model is very difficult unless you have like critical mass in terms of users, right? So you see a lot of crypto exchanges on BIN sponsorship models that offer a debit card component, and it works fine, right? But you know, Coinbase, for instance, but they have a tremendous amount of clients, right? So like in a startup concept, your sort of profitability curve like hockey sticks, right? Until you get like mass adoption and you can do that. But like from the perspective of like how you go about doing it, right? BIN sponsorship, there's plenty of, you know, it's just like neobanking in a sense. Like there's plenty of non-bank financial institutions that offer it, and they offer it as like a service. And like, yeah, you pay some due diligence fee, and it varies, right? Like you can't say, you know, if you went to 3 different potential BIN sponsors and said, here's all my stuff, pay the due diligence fee, and waited, you're going to get, assuming all agree to onboard you in the first place, they're all going to look at it and say, okay, here's your fee quote, here's your fee, and they're all going to be different. It's like underwriting, right? You're never going to get the same thing. So, you know, you really have to shop, right? And as a general rule, what you need between different BIN sponsors is probably about the same, right? And you also have to look at like small things and be aware of them, like in terms of like your minter, the person who's actually making the cards, right? Because a lot of BIN sponsors will say, go here, and they won't give you the flexibility to go to like the least costly alternative. So you bake in that because you actually have to have the cards manufactured. And there's all these other things that kind of play into it in terms of even software, right? Like how you manage that. Do they make you use their software? Is their software part of their quote, right? So it really breaks down, and it's always like very scattered across what sponsor that you're looking to ultimately work with. But if you wanted to get your foot in the door in terms of issuing some kind of branded, debit card, call it white label, call it whatever you want, BIN sponsorship is the low-hanging fruit. And like while you're doing that, as many, clients do, they can concurrently seek to go directly to the card issuers to get their own BIN, and then you cut out the middleman, some 9 months down the road, and profitability increases and all that kind of stuff. But like at a minimum, from a legal perspective, you're looking at really having to be at least a money service business and having a robust AML KYC procedure for onboarding, because that's all the rage, obviously, and BIN sponsors are regulated themselves, so they have to be very careful, and they have less control over who you onboard versus who they onboard directly as clients, because they're relying on you to collect AML KYC, right? They're relying on you to make sure that you're not like onboarding some guy from North Korea with a VPN, So it's a great place to start, but you have to shop around, and you have to be very wary of like the pitfalls that are associated with working through a sponsor as opposed to direct BIN. So if you have questions, you want to find a good BIN sponsor, I work with a few, definitely hit up Adam at adamtracy.io, and I'll talk to you next time. Cheers.